So good morning, and I'd like to first begin and thank the organizers for putting together such a tremendous program. I always find it a bit of a challenge coming here because you actually do hear and learn quite a bit, and I like to sort of bridge off of a lot of great thoughts that in order to make my talks relevant, and there have been a lot of great ones today, and hopefully the core of my presentation, I think, will summarize it. A couple of quick comments before I start. I think the organizers have done a great job of putting together a great agenda, and I think we're probably within 5 minutes of being on time for the close. I think we all know that's going to hell in a handbasket right now. So that's a bridge to the comment from Robin Hunter, who, for those of you that weren't here in past years, and I want to thank Robin for the foreshadowing, because, you know, I'm a subscriber to any press is good press, and you know, there's nothing ever wrong with that, although it does bring to mind the adage that never confuse title with intelligence, because, you know, Robin is the vice president at Leo, and taking a shot at me when I have the podium last is not necessarily the brightest move. And I think the last comment I'll make, just sort of setting things up, is that, you know, like any great essay or novel, you always want to start with a compelling opening. I think the morning sessions did just that. I think any great novel, book, or essay has a great middle with great content, and I think we've heard a lot about, you know, some great successes and great things to think about. And then a particularly great novel always finishes well, and I think for today we're just going to have to settle with 2 out of 3. So, 9 characteristics. I was asked. Oh, this didn't get changed actually. So I think we might be okay. So the most important characteristics for success in life sciences. If you could please pick one. There should have only been 5, but we'll see how it goes. So a lot of choices, and as I expected, a lot of variance across the board. Leading one's great drug and device, great organizational vision, value story, employees 15%, certainly a strong focus on innovation. And I think those are some of the things as an industry we typically speak a lot to. You have seen, if it's in the book, my theme will lead us to what I think are really the key elements that are going to be required for this industry to move ahead and be fundamentally successful. I think we've heard today about transformational products and programs. I think Richard talked a little bit about the emerging nature of individualized medicine. I think we heard from Jeff about going out and doing great business development. And maybe there are transformational small products that add to a portfolio that make it transformational. I would argue, even within those small products, however, we have to find the transformational value offering for a particular subset, and that may in fact be part of the market access question that Dominic referred to about the increasing complexity, and I think in a way is going to drive individualized medicine. I think we're seeing payers drive individualized medicine either through various PLAs. We haven't seen widespread international adoption of the NICE model with Velcade, where there was a pay for performance, but I think that type of thing is coming and may be an interim step before we truly get to understand how we can commercialize and bring the value proposition for individualized medicine. I think we saw a great example of how individual medicine can work at the individual patient level in John Haslam's presentation. So I think we're going to need to continue to bring transformational drugs and programs, including diagnostics, surrogates, biomarkers, linkages to outcomes, in order for this industry to be successful. And I think we will be challenged to make decisions about whether or not we commercialize a drug that doesn't have a transformational component to it. And we may have to think a little bit differently with a payer. If we have a great drug for 25% responders, maybe we need to find a way to get that drug to those 25% and understand our role and accountability on the 75% non-responders. And in fact, that's an example of a situation that we're dealing with at Celgene, where we have a very active drug for a very difficult to treat patient community, but its response rate is very limited. And is it reasonable for the payer to assume a 75% failure rate at the full price? And I think that those discussions will be interesting as we move ahead. Certainly from a Celgene perspective, we have a transformational portfolio, and I don't put this up here to highlight Celgene necessarily, but to highlight that if you have transformational drugs like lenalidomide for multiple myeloma, like Vidasa for certain subsets of AML, like thalidomide for myeloma, you can have enormous success. And I would tell you that in the Canadian construct, these results are very similar. And we're able to reinvest many of those revenues, or much of those revenues, back into leading edge science, but only in those compounds that are transformational. The next Me Too, if you don't have that properly positioned, I think is ultimately doomed to failure. The other line on here, though, that's important for me to highlight is successful global expansion of operations. And this slide really talks to it. When I joined in the summer of 2006, we were in about maybe a dozen countries, 750 employees, and now we're about 4,500 employees over the last 6 years. And while it's most definitely is a function of the portfolio, the balance of my talk, I think, will address some local observations on what I think is the fundamental element that has transformed Celgene as a global organization, and that is the focus on people. I don't think you can have transformational science or transformational programs or transformational relationships without transformational people. We can have the best overall science and data, but if you can't find the way to rethink the old paradigms, if you can't find the way to bring a Solaris at $400,000 or $500,000 annualized for a patient, that requires a whole new paradigm of thinking. And so too often, and I've been in those organizations, and I would argue many of you have been in those organizations, where the first place when things get tough, they get cut, is on the people front. It's on the development front. We heard about the need for improvement in selling skills and the ability at all levels of an organization to focus on that. From Robin's presentation, Dominic talked about negotiation skills. Those are very base level fundamentals, but too often in times of austerity or times of challenge, those are the areas that we begin to pull back on. So I apologize for the US reference here. I'm a very strong Canadian and becoming more and more nationalistic as I get older. But if there's one country that does passion pretty well from the front of the room, it's the US. And by the way, this is the only thing you can get off of PowerPoint when you go to the web. So nothing else comes under passion that I could actually put up. And passionate, so at Celgene, passionate really references the patient. Everything, we have now 70 people in Canada. Every one of those individuals that was hired, if they did not speak proactively, unprompted, to passion for the patient, they ultimately didn't make it through the queue. You can't train or coach or motivate passion. It is intrinsic. It typically drives next level behaviors. Some of them sometimes negative. Sometimes you can be, so passionate that you lose sight for the trees, but we'll address that in other characteristics. It has a high degree of self-sustainability. It really is an intrinsic driver. And when properly linked to organizational goals, it is an incredibly powerful force. So having an organization of people that were focused and dedicated in hematology, oncology that we have very much allows us to align those passions and those directions. And it's right through from every particular role in our organization. And if you're on the administrative support team, if you can't understand your role in helping a patient get access to a new medicine, if you can't connect with how that works, then you need to find a way, or ultimately you're not going to be successful. Team people. We talk about it from an industry perspective. We have to have subject matter experts, but a true team-based individual really has the ability to focus on the broader picture. They seek interdependence. I think, speaking to what perhaps has happened in the industry that Andrew Seymour talked about, and the drop in value at the perceived level of the customer, that lone wolf construct I don't think operates anymore, and it has to be more of a team-based, organizational-based approach. I know many of the larger organizations look at that with account management and representatives and MSLs, but if it isn't a fundamental construct of every part of your organization, it's a challenge. And this isn't necessarily novel or new, but I think it is something that's worthy to be highlighted. These people understand their role, and they're able to focus on the overall outcome. Don't tell my daughter that I used her in this picture. Customer-focused people. We talked a lot about patient orientation. I would argue that having the ability to hire people that are focused on the overall customer, and that's both the internal and external, understanding their relative impact is required across the entire organization in all functions. They naturally deliver, so if a marketer is patient-focused but not customer-focused, then quite often you can get that disconnect between what the marketer feels is the right program for the physicians based on their market research, and a disconnect of what the representative can use because they don't think of the representative as the customer or part of that entire chain. And I think that speaks to what we had heard about earlier about understanding the whole patient journey and all the elements that are included in that. And there was a question about customer centricity earlier today. We actually have a program at Celgene called Customer Think, which means, and we actually have in our boardrooms, every element of does the customer, what is the impact of this program on the customer? Because we've rolled out what we consider industry-leading programs, and we have thoroughly pissed off our customers because we didn't understand the impact of change on that regulatory or administrative component at the customer level, even though we thought it was great for the patient. And then innately understand the importance of accountability. Adaptable people, this is the second reference to lizards and frogs, I guess, what amphibians, but you know, typically very solution-oriented. Our industry is going to continue to go through change, and hiring people that are naturally open to change and adaptability just, it makes it a whole lot easier to work with. Who knows, I always get asked the question, Celgene's a prime takeover target, what do you think, how are you going to deal with it, what are you going to do? And the bottom line is if you're good at what you do and you can adapt, you can survive in anything. And ultimately, as changes come about, we get people who adapt easily. Well, they'll actually be your solution providers and your change agents during times of stress. Intelligent people, both high IQ and EQs, I think are very important. A lot has been written about this. Hiring intelligent people makes you look smarter. I'm living proof of that. We've got a lot of very good people, and I'm the beneficiary of a lot of those results. It does make others around them better. They get on board quickly if you've got the right mix. Smart people like to work with smart people just fundamentally because it's a whole lot more fun. And they ultimately become, you know, as you begin to create an organization that's based on good, smart orientation and the right balance, then you create an organization that's ultimately, I think, has been successful. Innovation, we've talked about it, but there's, you know, in the Canadian construct, we often get products brought to us, or we get programs brought to us, or we get the marketing strategy or the global strategy, and that's given to us. I think the truly successful organizations are the ones that are able to locally commercialize that and make the difference in the local environment. And that requires a level of innovation. Those are the people that challenge the status quo, and they're really just an organizational necessary skill set. So I've highlighted very briefly some high level. I feel that I have a bit of a platform to speak to those things because we have been very successful over the last five and a half years. And although it has been through I think the serendipity in some cases and the very good luck to have a great drug and to come forth, it has been the people and the processes that have fundamentally created our success as we've gone forth. So some of the things that we've done, this sort of the Celgene way, and this by no means is on any documents, but in order to close it up, I thought I'd put it. Everything we do when we recruit, it ultimately ends with a panel-style interview. This allows for complete alignment around all of the competencies, those attributes that we've talked about, the role attributes, the characteristics of the individuals, and the direct linkage to the organization's values. We've specifically retained and hired an internal recruitment specialist that is very driven and aligned on those, on the core elements of the job specificity. We do the usual pre and post briefings and really challenge, is this a short-term win or is this a longitudinal win? And if it's a short term and they haven't met some of those core attributes, and there are others, then ultimately, even if it's the great resume that we feel or the hiring manager feels will satisfy their need, they ultimately haven't been successful in the organization. The panel-based interview process, and then the GM final interview, not actually because I wanted to do it or I think I've got particular insight. It was remarkable when we did some surveys that the organizational engagement from as high as you can get it through the interview process, established a level of equity by those that have joined the organization and the investment by the organization in those individuals and in what they perceive to be their success, that we have, not only do you have that early hire on equity and enthusiasm that is so infectious with people who have joined the organization, but it allows for that alignment right up and through the org. So this was not rocket surgery. There was nothing enormously compelling, but when we talk about everything that we try to do, I think it is a good way from my perspective to close it, because at the end of it, it focuses this organization or this industry on people, and that's what this is about, people, about helping people. Thank you very much.